Hi, welcome to America Uncovered. I'm your host, Chris Chappell. Abortion. Even bringing it up is like saying, hey, I want to have a fight with everyone in the room right now. And if that's not controversial enough for you, let's also bring in Donald Trump. So you probably know that when it comes to abortion, President Trump is now pro-life. In other words, he's basically against abortion.
Now, for the first time since Roe v. Wade, America has a pro-life president, a pro-life vice president, a pro-life House of Representatives, and 25 pro-life Republican state capitals.
So the question many liberals and conservatives are asking is, will Trump overturn Roe v. Wade? That's the 1973 court decision that effectively legalized abortion across the U.S. Well, it turns out it's not that simple. I mean, if it were that simple, we wouldn't need to make a video about it, right? As much as the president might like to, he doesn't actually have the power to just make abortion illegal. That power falls to the U.S. Supreme Court, and even then, only sort of, but not really. The Supreme Court is the highest federal court in the United States. The Supreme Court doesn't make laws. It interprets laws. But its interpretations can sometimes have the same effect as making a law, like for example when it either upholds or strikes down a state law. In the landmark 1973 case Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court overturned state bans on abortion. That's different than passing a nationwide law that makes abortion legal. Specifically, the ruling meant that states that wanted to outright ban abortion were not allowed to anymore. Obviously, some people were happy about this, and others were not. Actually, before Roe v. Wade, 4 states, Hawaii, Alaska, New York, and Washington, had already completely legalized abortion. So the ruling only affected the other 46 states, and even among those, more than a dozen already allowed abortion in cases of danger to the woman's health, severe fetal deformities, rape, or incest. Interestingly, many of those states that were allowing these exceptions to their anti-abortion laws had Republican governors, like Governor Ronald Reagan, who signed the California law legalizing abortion in 1967, while states in New England, for example, still had strict anti-abortion laws because anti-abortion activists were mostly Catholics who voted for Democrats. Politics sure change over the years, don't they? In Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court ruled 7-2 that strict anti-abortion laws violated a woman's right to privacy guaranteed by the 14th Amendment. But the court also ruled that states do have an interest in preserving and protecting the health of the pregnant woman and an important interest in protecting the potentiality of human life, which have to be balanced against the woman's constitutional rights. What does that mean? It meant that states couldn't outright ban abortions anymore, but Roe v. Wade did still allow states to regulate abortions in certain ways, as did a related 1992 Supreme Court ruling. The question at hand is, if Roe v. Wade were overturned, would abortion become illegal again? No, it would just hand that decision back to individual states. So, what would happen? Currently, 4 states have trigger laws that would automatically ban abortions if Roe v. Wade were overturned. 5 more have expressed their intention to limit abortion and would probably pass anti-abortion laws if they could. On the other side, 9 states have completely legalized abortion, so they wouldn't be affected at all by a new ruling. And in the other 32 states, well, it's complicated, but most of them already have some degree of restriction on abortion. Some have laws on the books from the pre-Roe v. Wade days, and some would probably keep abortion mostly legal. So depending on what state you live in, overturning Roe v. Wade will either make a huge difference, or no difference, or somewhere in between. Regardless of what happens in the Supreme Court, though, a woman could still travel to another state to get an abortion legally. Like if you're the mistress of an anti-abortion congressman who accidentally gets you pregnant and then tells you to get rid of it. The good news is, now that congressman has a lot more time to spend with his family, if they're willing to spend it with him. Let's get back to talking about abortion. Something I never thought I'd say. One thing overturning Roe v. Wade would do, though, is disproportionately affect low-income women, women who can't afford to, say, drive to California for the abortion. Wealthy women, on the other hand, would be free to take the world's least fun road trip. It would be like the opposite of going to Disneyland. Anyway, back to the Supreme Court, which may soon have to deal with this rather weighty decision. The Supreme Court is a panel of 9 justices, or judges, who are appointed for life. Who appoints them? Whichever president happens to be in charge when a former justice retires or dies. Well, except in the weird case where Republicans blocked President Obama from appointing anyone. So President Trump made that appointment a year later, replacing the guy who died in 2016 with his own conservative justice. And now, Justice Anthony Kennedy is about to retire, and Trump wants to appoint conservative judge Brett Kavanaugh to the post. If Kavanaugh gets confirmed by the Senate, that would mean 5 out of 9 Supreme Court justices would lean conservative. And a majority conservative Supreme Court could overturn Roe v. Wade, right? Well, that's what Trump is hoping for. He was very clear about it during his campaign.
Do you want the court, including the justices that you will name, to overturn Roe v. Wade?
Well, if we put another 2 or perhaps 3 justices on, that's really what's going to be, that will happen. And that'll happen automatically, in my opinion, because I am putting pro-life justices on the court.
And now that Trump has nominated Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, it's time for the media to ask, is this the guy that's going to overturn Roe v. Wade?
You are going to see 20 states pass laws banning abortion outright. Just banning abortion, and because they know that there are now going to be 5 votes on the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade. And abortion will be illegal in a significant part of the United States in 18 months.
Nothing like a good bit of sensationalism to push to the news, even if it's probably wrong. In fact, this was the same thing some people worried about when President Ronald Reagan picked 3 conservative justices. And, well, Roe v. Wade was not overturned. And of course, let's not bother with actually listening to what nominee Brett Kavanaugh has said on the matter. This is from 2006 when he had been nominated for the D.C. Circuit Court.
On the question of Roe v. Wade, if confirmed to the D.C. Circuit, I would follow Roe v. Wade faithfully and fully. That would be binding precedent of the court.
Does that mean he wouldn't try to overturn it if appointed to the Supreme Court? This is from 2 years ago.
Can you think of a case that deserves to be overturned?
Yes.
Would you volunteer one?
No.
Well, technically he could have been talking about any controversial Supreme Court decision. But deserves to be is very different from are you going to do it? Like, you might think that the head of the MS-13 gang deserves to be arrested, but you're not going to be the one to do it. So the question is, if Kavanaugh gets confirmed as justice, will this new Supreme Court actually overturn Roe v. Wade? The answer is probably not, even with 5 pro-life judges. That's because of something called precedent, where courts follow the decisions of previous judges on similar issues. Judges take precedent very seriously. Over the past 70 years, the Supreme Court made almost 9,000 decisions, and only 75 were overturned. And you know, in a country founded on the rule of law, it's kind of a good thing the law isn't radically changing every time there's a new Supreme Court justice. And that's especially the case with conservative judges like Kavanaugh, who tend to reject judicial activism, that is, using court decisions to make radical changes to laws. But is there a chance Roe v. Wade could be overturned? Well, the justices can't simply decide to go back and change a decision on a 45-year-old case. They can only overturn it if there's a new case that challenges it. And that is unlikely. There are no serious cases in the works that directly challenge all of Roe v. Wade. But what is likely under this new conservative-leaning Supreme Court is that pieces of Roe v. Wade will be overturned, or that the Supreme Court will make judgments that allow states to further limit the scope of abortions, like who can have them, at what stage in the pregnancy, and which techniques can be used. For example, over the past decade, Texas has passed a number of laws limiting abortion. Last year, they passed a law banning a common type of second trimester abortion called D&E. An abortion clinic, Whole Women's Health, is now suing the Texas Attorney General over that law. That case will be heard in a federal district court this November, and it could make its way to the U.S. Supreme Court in a few years. And then there's an Indiana law that attempts to restrict access to abortion. It says a woman can't have an abortion just because of the gender, race, or disability, including Down syndrome, of their fetuses. That law was signed by then-Governor and current Vice President Mike Pence. It was overturned by a federal appeals court in April. But if the state of Indiana decides to appeal the court ruling, this case might be on its way to the Supreme Court as well. And these are the kinds of cases that a conservative Supreme Court could theoretically use over the next several years to limit the scope of abortion. It would be hard, though, to overturn the fundamental issue decided by Roe v. Wade, which is that the 14th Amendment guarantees the right to privacy, which includes a woman's right to get an abortion without interference from the state before the fetus is viable. Now, there is another way Roe v. Wade could be directly overturned, and it came from the oral argument on the ruling of Roe v. Wade by its author, Justice Harry Blackmun. He was appointed by Nixon, by the way. He said the word person as used in the 14th Amendment does not include the unborn. But if personhood is established, the case collapses, because then the fetus's right to life would be guaranteed specifically by the 14th Amendment. And that ultimately is what's at the core of the abortion debate. Is abortion the murder of an unborn child? Or is the fetus still a part of the mother until it can survive on its own, and she therefore has the right to privacy and to choose what happens to her body? Right now, there's a lot of debate about when human life begins, and your view of that issue has a big impact on your view of abortion. If it's established with scientific certainty that life begins at conception, Roe v. Wade could be overturned completely using the 14th Amendment. That may never happen. Or there would have to be a constitutional amendment passed that defined personhood as beginning at conception, which may also never happen. So at the end of the day, it's going to be hard to find a solution that satisfies everyone, as The Simpsons so aptly pointed out.
Abortions for all. Very well. No abortions for anyone. Abortions for some, miniature American flags for others.
Ugh, politicians and their short-term solutions. So what do you think about Kavanaugh and the possibility of overturning Roe v. Wade? Leave your comments below. And before you go, I know some of you are wondering, how can Chris and his team afford to make such great episodes every week? The answer is, it's because of you. We rely mainly on financial support from viewers. You can help. Go to our crowdfunding website, patreon.com/AmericaUncovered, and contribute $1 or more per episode. Every bit makes a huge difference. Once again, I'm your host, Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.